Yeah, I do think this realignment's interesting. As I was listening to you talk, I actually think where it took place when you were describing yourself, right, in the 2000s, somebody who thought of yourself as belonging in the Democratic Party, certainly with civil libertarian instincts, which, by the way, even back when we were in college, I shared as well.
Yeah, we agreed on those issues. Absolutely.
Agreed on those issues. One of the people who provided voice to that, at least when he ran for president, was actually Barack Obama, right? He was far more skeptical of the Iraq War than anybody else in the Republican Party. It sounded a lot like Donald Trump in 2016 for his skepticism to the Iraq War. Was skeptical of the bailouts to the big banks that came in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. And so in many ways, a lot of what you see in America First conservatism, in some ways, if you had to choose between John McCain and Barack Obama, found itself probably more closely in the voice of Barack Obama, certainly in the areas of financial policy and crony capitalism, than it did in the Republican nominee's voice at that time. But I think something happened in those years, right? It's almost as though, I don't think Obama ever had the vehemence of going and shutting down the deep state, but there were sort of things he said that had a vague civil libertarian vibe to them. It was more of a vibe than a commitment. But I think that, and I think you see some of that with RFK today too. It's more of a vibe than an actual commitment. But nonetheless, when he went in there, I think it sort of showed the deep state took over, or whoever was actually running the show said, no, you got it the other way. You say you want to close Guantanamo? No, that ain't going to happen. Not on my watch. You say you want to be non-interventionist in foreign policy? You want to get your troops out? No. We're going to do things a little different way. And they controlled him. He was lucid. He was new. He was different than Joe Biden, but they controlled him in a very different way than I think they're controlling Biden now. And so I think that alignment or that realignment, I think in some ways took place where even if you had the Democratic Party's version of somebody who was skeptical of the administrative state, the noblesse oblige, that effectively then becomes part of it, those are the years in which I think that realignment took place. But it's easy for me to sit here and criticize Democrats. I'll also say in the Republican Party, I actually think that there's a quiet reluctance to really go after this superstructure of the so-called administrative state as well. I am somewhat concerned by, and I'm actually going to give a speech in the next week or so where I lay this out. I haven't focused on this in my public commentary so far. It is going to be important to me going forward on what I see as two strains of potential America First nationalism in the future. And I use nationalism in a good way. I think positive nationalism grounded in our ideals isn't a bad word, but there's two strains of America First nationalism and of the Republican Party more broadly. One which wants to replace that left-wing noblesse oblige with a right-wing version of a noblesse oblige, a left-wing nanny state with a right-wing nanny state, a left-wing administrative and bureaucratic state with a right-wing version of the same. Industrial policy, greater regulations from the Department of Transportation to the CFPB to otherwise to say, no, we need to do this in a way that helps American workers and manufacturers. Goals which I favor, but means which I don't. And then what I view as more of a national libertarian alternative, which says that I don't care if you're left wing, right wing, any wing, shut it down in terms of the actual apparatus. America, for better or worse, we're not a country that's okay with saying that as long as the economic indices are in a good place, we're going to shut up, sit down, and do as we're told by a bunch of bureaucrats that we can't elect out of office. I don't care if you're on the left or the right. I'm against it. I want to shut it down. I think that is not a toxic rift, not a vitriolic rift, but an earnest intellectual rift between thoughtful people in the Republican Party as well. So it's not just a Democrat versus Republican issue, but I think it's probably more of an intra-party divide in both political parties in terms of, do you want to use the reins of administration, right, of bureaucracy to effectuate policy goals you see as worthy, equity in the Democratic Party's version of it, prosperity for American workers and manufacturers in the America First version of it, or some other objective, national security objective and surveillance state objective in the Dick Cheney wing of the Republican Party version of it? Or are you in what I've used myself certainly is in more of a national libertarian camp to say that, yes, we care about the national security and sovereignty and identity of the United States foremost, but within that constraint, we don't want some sort of bureaucratic apparatus at all, whether or not we could wield it in the short run for our own objectives. The thing we actually want is just to get in there and shut it down.